In a world driven by power and secrecy, we unveil the truth behind global events. In a world shaped by war, politics, and hidden agendas, we cut through the noise to expose the forces driving global events. From geopolitical tensions to economic warfare, from covert operations to propaganda battles, we break down the crises that shape our future and the mechanisms of control behind them. Whether you're here to uncover the truth, challenge the narrative, or simply understand the bigger picture, the Crisis and Control Report is your go-to source for hard-hitting analysis and fearless discussion. Subscribe now and let's pull back the curtain on power, conflict and control. A new video will premiere every Sunday. Now let's dive in.
They call it help. They say it's about economic stability and lifting nations out of poverty. But behind the fancy speeches and billion-dollar loans, there's a dark truth about the International Monetary Fund. It doesn't just help nations, it owns them. For decades, the IMF has loaned money to struggling countries, but these loans come with crippling conditions. Instead of lifting nations out of poverty, they trap them in endless debt, forcing governments to cut social services, sell national assets, and give up control of their own economies. So how does this system work? Who really benefits, and can any country escape the IMF's grip? Let's break it down. The International Monetary Fund was founded in 1944 at the end of World War II. It was designed to stabilize the global economy, help countries in financial crises, and prevent another Great Depression. Sounds great, right? Here's how it works. Countries that need financial help apply for an IMF loan. The IMF gives them money, but with strings attached. In return, nations must follow strict policies dictated by the IMF. These conditions are where the real problem starts. They often include cutting social services. Governments must reduce spending on healthcare, education, and subsidies for food and fuel. Privatization, selling public assets like water, energy, and transportation to private corporations, often foreign ones. Deregulation, stripping away laws that protect workers, wages, and the environment. Instead of helping, these policies make countries more dependent on foreign corporations and banks, keeping them in an endless cycle of debt. But who really benefits from this system? If the IMF was truly about helping the world, you'd expect all nations to have equal power. But that's not how it works. The IMF is controlled by rich, developed countries, mainly the United States and Western Europe. The US alone holds 17% of the voting power in the IMF. Europe and Japan control another 30% combined. Meanwhile, poorer nations, who actually need help, have almost no say in how the IMF operates. This means that when the IMF lends money, it's not just about economics, it's about control. Developed countries use the IMF to push their own political and economic interests, often forcing poor nations to open their economies for foreign investment while keeping them too weak to compete. It's not charity, it's economic colonization. The biggest problem with IMF loans? They're designed to never be fully repaid. Countries that take IMF loans often can't pay them back because the interest keeps growing. The more they borrow, the more they owe. IMF policies shrink their economies. Cutting public services and privatizing industries weakens a country's ability to grow. They have to take more loans to cover the last ones, and the cycle continues. Examples of countries caught in the IMF's web: Argentina took massive loans, but IMF conditions led to economic collapse and riots. The country had to take another loan just to survive. Greece. After the 2008 financial crisis, Greece was forced into IMF-backed austerity. Unemployment skyrocketed, pensions were slashed, and people lost their homes. Sri Lanka borrowed heavily from the IMF. When it couldn't repay, inflation soared, food and fuel shortages hit, and protests erupted. Africa. Many African nations, from Kenya to Zambia, are drowning in IMF debt, forced to cut services while foreign companies extract their resources. Instead of helping nations become independent, the IMF keeps them dependent. IMF loans don't just control economies, they control governments. Leaders who resist the IMF often get pushed out. Pro-IMF candidates get support from the West. Protests and unrest often follow IMF-backed policies. Countries that refuse IMF conditions often face pressure through economic sanctions, like blocking trade and cutting financial aid. Political interference is also common, with support given to opposition candidates or political uprisings. Media narratives play a role too, as Western media often portrays IMF critics as corrupt or bad leaders. The message is clear: follow the IMF's rules or suffer the consequences. Are you finding this breakdown useful? If so, hit that like button. It helps more people see this content. And if you want fact-based analysis without the political spin, make sure to subscribe and share this video. New episodes every Sunday and Wednesday. Some countries are finding ways out of the IMF's grip. Iceland in 2008, after its financial crisis, Iceland rejected IMF austerity and focused on internal economic growth instead of debt repayment. Ecuador in 2007 kicked out the IMF and refused to pay unfair loans, prioritizing social spending instead. BRICS nations, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, are working on alternative financial systems to avoid relying on the IMF. These examples show that it is possible to break free, but it takes strong leadership and economic independence. The IMF was meant to help nations, but in reality, it's a system designed to keep them in check. Poor countries get loans, but the terms keep them weak. Rich countries and corporations get stronger, gaining access to markets and resources. When nations resist, they face economic and political pressure. But there's hope. More nations are questioning the IMF's role and seeking alternatives. The real question is, will the world wake up to this system and demand change, or will the debt trap keep spinning? This is the Crisis and Control Report. Debt is power, but knowledge is stronger. Subscribe, stay informed, and question everything. New videos dropped frequently. See you next time.